Okay.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining me at today during my regular roundtable talk. For the past several months this year, as Madam Vice President, I have had a culture and diversity reader initiative. And so each month prior to now, I had been focusing on sharing and the theme of that month. So, for example, during Black History Month, we did a theme around Black history and specifically focused on Black history in Baton Rouge. March was Women's History Month, same thing. But right now is a very pivotal moment in East Baton Rouge Parish. Matter of fact, all across the nation and on all levels of government is a very pivotal moment. And so I'm shifting my focus this month from the culture and diversity reader to focus on redistricting because it's uber important. And so definitely at the top of the list for us to discuss. I want to start off by saying how important redistricting is. So, of my personal opinion, that redistricting is the most important vote that any member of any elected body can make, period. Okay, so for example, in East Baton Rouge Parish, redistricting is more important than our tax plan that we pushing. We do town halls for and try to get constituent buy-in for and all of that jazz. It is more important even than the superintendent vote, right? And so it's so important that when the census results come in and we vote on how to reapportion our districts, it literally shapes the direction of the school system. This year, or this cycle of redistricting, is a game changer because we are currently a board of 9, and we have 5 white board members and 4 Black board members. Now, the nature of redistricting, I know some people get it, but for those that want to say, well, I'm racializing it, let's be clear. The nature of redistricting is racial and you cannot get around it. And as my panelists, well, as my roundtable guests will share, the historical context, again, you just can't sleep on the racial factor. And so, again, to my point, right now is a game changer. The demographics in East Baton Rouge Parish minus school system. So that means you don't count Baker, you don't count Zachary, you don't count Central. Once you don't do that, we are at less than 41% white residents. That means you cannot fairly move forward with redistricting if you maintain a majority white district. It's not possible. And so with that, I will yield to my guests and let them introduce themselves in 2 minutes, 2 minutes each. I know my professors and my lawyers, we struggle with that. And I know for sure my pastors, but I know y'all can do it. I know I have faith. So 2 minutes each. Share with those that are viewing a little about yourself personally, and then in the context of being community leaders, because each of you are community leaders in your own right. Professor Johnson, would you like to go first since you're already unmuted?
Yes, that'd be fine. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this process. Vice President, you're the Vice President Collins. I'd like to give honor where honor is due.
Thank you.
I've been practicing law for 45 years. I was president of the Louisiana NAACP for 22 years, served on the NAACP National Board of Directors, And currently I am a visiting professor of law at Southern University Law Center, where Judge Janice Clark and I this semester are teaching over 20 students in the voting rights litigation class. And our emphasis is on redistricting and reapportionment. After the census, every 10 years, this nation takes a census, and the 2020 census was completed. We got the numbers, and then we look at doing an analysis of state agencies or state political subdivisions to determine if there is not a dilution of Black voting spread in accordance with the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And East Baton Rouge Parish, the East Baton Rouge Parish school system, as part of that analysis, we have students who are doing some research on it, and we try to provide as much assistance as we can, because it will be another 10 years before we address these issues, which will be 2030. That's my 2 minutes.
It's okay. Yes, Attorney Alfreda Tillman Bester. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alfreda Tillman Bester, and I am currently serving as special counsel for human services at Southern University Law Center's Vulnerable Communities and Peoples Initiative. I am also an adjunct professor teaching obligations and healthcare law at the Law Center. I have had the privilege of serving as Louisiana Secretary of Labor, and also as Undersecretary of Labor, and as General Counsel for the Louisiana State Conference of the NAACP for 12 years. And I want to say in particular that I served as lead counsel in the case of McClanahan versus the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board in 2014. Dr. Ernest Johnson and I served as counsel on that particular case.
Thank you. Pastor Smith?
Thank you. My name is Fred Smith. I serve as pastor of Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church. I'm also a member of a confederation of pastors and clergy called Prophetic Voices. Our concern is shared with the concern that Mrs. Collins has voiced with regard to redistricting. We think that it is extremely important. We constantly encourage people to vote, but the other side of that is making sure that your vote has the greatest amount of efficacy possible. And when you are packed and stacked into districts in such a way as to maintain a majority of people and that they can maintain power, then even when you're voting, the strength of that vote is diluted. So I think that this is an extremely important topic, and I'm happy to have been asked to serve on this roundtable.
Thank you. And Brother Peter Robbins Brown.
Peter Robbins Brown. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director at Louisiana Progress. Attorney Bester is on our board. And we work on a lot of issues. I would say that, pretty much, I think everybody's really covered why redistricting is important, the immediacy of it, the once every 10 years. I think the other kind of way that we think about it is that the shape of political districts largely determines who runs for office, who wins, and then how that person votes and acts and leads or doesn't lead once they're in office. Similar to Professor Johnson, we do a lot of research and analysis looking around the state to kind of determine where do we see the two principles that we really look at are competitiveness, or often in Louisiana, lack thereof between in districts, and racial proportionality. Where are Black and Brown communities having their voice and vote and power suppressed? And I think to this discussion, one of the most glaring, if not the most glaring example in the state is the East Baton Rouge School Board. When you look at what Ms. Collins pointed out, when you look at the population that is being represented, but then the makeup of the board, there's just such a stark contrast there. And I think that, you know, this is one of the key areas that we can really fight and make a difference in this round of redistricting.
Thank you so much. So what I want to do is make sure that people understand the basics about redistricting, period, first, before we go into like the history of redistricting on a national level, and then put it in context locally. And so, as I mentioned at the very beginning, redistricting usually, and I say usually because part of the local history is that we have had additional redistricting locally in East Baton Rouge Parish School System. So redistricting happens usually right after the census is done every 10 years, so once a decade. What is attempted to be achieved, or should be attempted to be achieved, is that every district has about the same number of residents in each district. And then the number of seats in each body is representative of the number of residents in the entire political body. Okay, so what does that mean? Then, for example, in East Baton Rouge Parish, the recent census showed that the white population is 40.88%. Let me share my screen so you can see that. Okay, and so then what that looks like in terms of the overall demographics is that in comparison to 2010, in 2010, the census showed 46.5% white, 47% Black. Let's just round up, 47% white, 48% Black, 3% Asian, almost 2% other. Okay, when you add that up for 2010, it pretty much comes to 100%. However, when you get to the 2020 census information, and what I'm doing, and anybody can go to the school board website, go to the board meeting link that has labeled board docs, and each agenda item has backup information and files. This particular PowerPoint that I'm sharing, if you want to look at the whole PowerPoint, is there for the October 21st meeting, and anything with redistricting from September to October, or various PowerPoints. Okay, and so now, interestingly enough, in this presentation, what you see is the 2020 census, 41% white, and again, I'm just for ease rounding up, 47% Black. And look at how that Black has gone down by like a percentage point almost, right? Asian 3.6, and other 3%. When you add that up, you don't get to 100%. And that is because what is not included is what some refer to as aggregate Black. Okay, and aggregate Black is Black plus white, Black plus Asian, Black plus what have you. And we know historically, and I'm sure my guests will go into some detail about, we know historically, Black, a drop of Black, as they say, make you Black. Okay, and so then why is that not included in this information? All right. So in terms of the overall process, specific to East Baton Rouge Parish, what we're dealing with is, right now we don't have a board approved timeline for our process moving forward. There was discussion at one point about an accelerated timeline. And so let me show you what I mean. This is on the last presentation to the board, the last recorded presentation during a live board meeting, of which was 30 minutes. And this was in like the last 5 minutes. So during the last board meeting, during the October 21st board meeting, 3 possible timelines were proposed. The latest possible timeline based on by law And that's the bottom line with this particular situation. By law, we have to approve and submit a plan or a map to the Secretary of State by June 21st, 2022. Okay, now, based on that, you can wait until the last minute and the board can approve a plan like in May or June 1st, right? And then if something happens, then you rush the deadlines, etc. Of course, that's not recommended. Generally considered timeline that has actually been by this particular consultant. And if I didn't mention earlier, this particular consultant presentation that I'm sharing is strategic demographics. And they have more than one redistricting client. And they have, I think they said about 6 school boards that they're doing in addition to EBR or that they were doing. That's another piece that they were doing in addition to EBR. Their general guidance to everyone that they are working with is to finish up and vote as a body by March, which gives enough time for public input, gives enough time to analyze and review and think it through as individual board members and as a group. And then early enough, though, that if there are any hiccups, you're not worrying about brushing up against the June deadline, that you have to that hard, fast legal deadline of June to get it to the Secretary of State. Now, there was discussion at the school, on the school board, of an accelerated timeline, of which, yes, legally, we don't have to get it in until June 20th of 2022, but let's knock it on out and vote on December 28th and go through our whole process and vote on December 28th in the middle of the 3 biggest holidays of the year. And the argument for it is it's the most transparent approach. If there's somebody that wants to run for a seat and they just want to serve on the board, then it takes away the unfair advantage of an incumbent to know what the lines are going to be before everybody else. And then, if you wait till March, if you wait till May, then, anybody that wants to run have to wait until they see what the lines are. Well, I am an incumbent, but I do also realize that until a vote is made, I don't know what the lines are going to be. So how much unfair advantage am I having, unless the argument is that we are going to have a consensus before we vote and we just holding it to our chest because we don't want anybody to have a chance outside of the incumbents to run. I mean, it's an argument to be made, but not like that. And so where we are now, and so then to be clear with the public, and I'm gonna summarize the process, which we have not voted on yet, nor do we have any timelines attached to as a body. The general process is individual board members work with the consultant company that the school system, the school district has contracted with to come up with individual maps. If each board member so chooses, maybe a couple of board members band together and come up with a map that they say, hey, let's present this to the rest. But long story short, individual board members work on a plan, present to their colleagues, and then have public meetings. The board decides of all that's presented, which plans do we want to say, hey, these are possibilities, present those to the public, and then we vote on our final plan that we will submit to the Secretary of State. So that is what our redistricting process looks like in a nutshell. There has been controversy up until this point in terms of who we contracted with. Strategic Demographics is no longer our consultant for our redistricting process. Some and you all can feel free to chime in as we move forward on your thoughts about what I've said thus far and what I'm about to say. We did an RFQ process, that we technically did not have to do as a school board to say, hey, submit to us how you would propose to do that. Submit to us and bid for a contract on doing our redistricting plan. There were 3 who applied. One was rated at, I'm gonna tell you exactly what the scores were. I wrote, you just discussed this last night. So one was rated at 6. Nine. I want to tell you the right thing. Okay, I'm sorry. So I keep saying 600 something. The scores was 469, 465, and 444. The highest scored one was data center at 469. The lowest scored one was strategic demographics at 444. That's a 25-point difference. The board voted I voted no, and several others did vote no, but the approved contract was for strategic demographics, who has a 25-point spread between them and data center. In discussing concern about the contracting process, the justification for going with the lowest score company was that they've done the work with us before, which is true, and not the most unreasonable argument. But okay, if you're gonna go with somebody that didn't score the highest, okay, they're still competent people, so fine. But then when you listen to the narrative, they like to explain that it was just a 4-point difference. It's just, we're talking about nothing, and then, that's when stuff doesn't start to pass the smell test, because you don't need to exaggerate on the issue. It's a 25-point spread between who had the highest score and who was chosen. Own it. You chose somebody who fell short of the other by 25 points, not 4 points. We're not talking about the second person who was in the middle. We talk about who was recommended by the committee based on the points and who we chose. 25-point spread. And so, as I mentioned, strategic demographics, who we are familiar with as a district and we're working with, has pulled out. For the sake of time, I won't go into details. The bottom line is now we have a vote coming up on November the 18th, which is the 3rd Thursday of this month. Please tune in either on YouTube or show up and participate in the process. We will be voting on who will move us forward as a consultant in this process. Common sense says, okay, we don't have the person who we're familiar with, go with the highest scoring firm that was recommended by our RFQ committee. It should be a no-brainer. We'll see if it's a no-brainer when we get to the vote. Okay, and so then moving forward with the agenda, I would like to, let's talk about putting EBR school boards, redistricting in historical context. Professor Ernest Johnson and attorney Alfreda Tillman Bester, if you all could, and chime in as you choose, explain the legal history, first from a national scope, and then bring us into how that played out locally, the legal history of redistricting. And Professor Johnson, I see you unmuted, so feel free.
Why don't we let Alfreda, she was lead counsel in the most recent case dealing with redistricting and EBR.
Okay.
Start off and I'll follow back up, because that whole process of going from 11 to 9,
yes,
which that's all part of it, so we need to bring folk up on that too.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so since Dr. Johnson was my law professor, I still know how to follow directions. Okay, and he was also my boss when I was general counsel for the Louisiana NAACP. So for 12 of those 22 years that he was the president of the NAACP, I was general counsel. So I'm used to doing what he tells me to do. So here I go. In 1954, we got Brown versus the Board of Education. That was the first, let me just say, the first major lawsuit that dealt specifically with education and the separate but equal issue. What Brown said was that separate but equal is inherently unequal. And so that was the foundation of a lot of not just education, but a lot of our civil rights law. In 1965, the United States Congress passed, and President Lyndon Baines Johnson, signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The act assured that all Americans had equal access to the polls without political or racist interference and without threat of physical harm. Dawn said earlier that race was inextricable from voting rights, and that is absolutely true. It's enshrined in the law that we're trying to assure people of African descent have equal access to the polls. You will also recall that East Baton Rouge Parish had the longest running school board desegregation case in the nation at one point. What you may not know is that that case came after Brown versus the Board of Education, but before the Civil Rights Act of 1965 was enacted. That case started in 1956. And that case went all the way through 2010, up to 2010. That case was still active. It was still active. And Dr. Johnson was very much a part of that. And our late friend, Robert C. Williams, was lead counsel on that case for years. But for over 40, I think it was 48 years total, that case ran. And that just shows you how entrenched people were in their silos, trying to not do what the Civil Rights Act required, and to not do what Brown versus the Board of Education required. So in 2013, I'm skipping up a little bit because I know I have a limited amount of time, but in 2013, the United States Supreme Court held in Shelby County versus Holder that it was unconstitutional to use the coverage formula in the Voting Rights Act to determine which jurisdictions are subject to the pre-clearance requirement section of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. What that means in lay terms is there was a definition of what jurisdictions would be covered by the Voting Rights Act. There were some whole states and there were some areas of different states, but it was based on the history of those particular areas and their discrimination. So instead,
Attorney Investor, can you clarify for some who are not familiar, go a little bit deeper into the section 2 and 5? Am I saying that right?
Section, okay.
So help people understand procedurally what things had looked like prior to that gutting.
Okay, so the part that they gutted was one that we don't hear a lot about. And I was trying not to be too lawyer nerd, but I mean, okay, thank you, Dawn, for
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act defined the areas that would be required to be pre-cleared. That meant that they had to go to the Justice Department or to the federal court to determine whether any plans or any changes in the voting, whether it was for a precinct or whether it was for rules and procedures, it had to be pre-cleared before the covered jurisdictions could change anything. Okay. Section 5 gave us the pre-clearance provision. Okay, so that just, again, it meant that any changes had to be pre-cleared before. So you couldn't change the number of people that were in a precinct. You couldn't change the voting procedure. You couldn't take away someone's ability to mail in a ballot. You couldn't change early voting. You couldn't do any of those things without pre-clearance. Okay, so that because we no longer had Section 4 to define what jurisdictions needed to be pre-cleared, it effectively rendered Section 5 dead. So the only thing that we have left now is Section 2. Now, Section 2 is still viable, but it takes a long time. Litigation, if you're coming after something has occurred, it takes a long time. You have to file it, then you have to go through all of this procedure. You have to go through discovery. You have to go through everything that litigation requires, and you have to contend with the attorneys on the other side and all of the all of the delay tactics, right? I don't want to, all of the delay tactics that come into that. So you could be years, as we saw in Davis, trying to get an issue solved. Whereas if we were allowed to continue with pre-clearance, that those issues are decided up front. There are certain things that you can't do. And so elections go on and assure to the greatest extent possible that everyone has equal access to the polls. Okay. Did that answer? Okay. All right. So, all right. So with Shelby County, what Shelby County did was, as I said, did away with they said that and when I say they, I'm talking about the United States Supreme Court. It was supposed to be the fairest court and supposed to protect the rights of us all. But the Supreme Court said that we didn't need that anymore, and that it wasn't fair the way that we so-called singled out those covered districts because they had this history of discrimination. And so since the Voting Rights Act, we haven't had that history of discrimination. Well, the only reason that we still had discrimination, don't get us wrong, because people find a way to do things that are not discriminatory on their face. But it ended, they said that we don't need it anymore because people aren't discriminating anymore. Well, the only reason that they weren't discriminating to the extent that they had previously was because they had to be pre-cleared in order to do the things that they wanted to do. So, it was the analogy of saying, well, if you go outside, you may get rained on if it's raining, but if you leave your umbrella if you leave your umbrella in the house, you're definitely going to be rained on, right? So it was this crazy rationale. I'm sorry if it sounds disrespectful to the court, but the court did something that was inexplicable. So instead of them saying, well, okay, we don't want to single out these districts that have the history of discrimination, what they should have done if they wanted to be fair was to say, we're going to make that applicable all over the nation. So anybody that wants to change, they will have to be pre-cleared, right? But what they did instead was say that that these districts, these jurisdictions that had this overwhelming history of being discriminatory, they weren't discriminating. Never mind that they weren't discriminating because the pre-clearance provision was in place, but they weren't discriminating at that time. So the pre-clearance provision was no longer necessary. So, so essentially it gutted the Voting Rights Act. Those things that gave us the protections that nobody could come and say, we can't bring water to people who've been standing in line for 5 hours. That would never have happened in Georgia had the Voting Rights Act not been struck down in Shelby County. The effect this happened in 2013. At the end of 2013 and into the very beginning of 2014, as soon the ink was not dry on Shelby County,
Yes.
when all of these same districts and more that were controlled by mostly by Republicans, extensively, exclusively by Republicans, where jurisdictions were controlled by Republicans, you started seeing these voter suppression laws being enacted. Some of them were so bad that the court said that they were enacted with surgical precision to exclude people of color and especially Black people from having full voting rights. It happened in East Baton Rouge Parish. In July of 2014, they in the middle of qualifying for the school board, they decided, although they had just finished at the end of 2013 of reapportioning and redistricting, they decided after Shelby County that they were going to reapportion and redistrict again. The reapportionment ended with them reducing the number of school board seats from 11 to 9, disenfranchising multiple people who had fewer representatives that they could access, right, and tell them about any issues that they had with the school board. And so it ended up being a 5-4, 4 majority minority districts and 5 majority white districts. And so we told them that it wasn't fair, that you were disenfranchising people of color, and if you go through with it, we will sue. So Dr. Johnson and I sued. We brought this action on behalf of, and I want to name, please indulge me for a second, Dawn, because I want to name those very brave people who came to us and said, this is not fair. We don't want this to happen. The named plaintiff was Michael McClanahan, who was president of the East Baton Rouge Parish branch of the NAACP and is currently the president of the state conference. Dr. James Finney, Mr. William Glasper, who had been the treasurer of the East Baton Rouge Parish branch of the NAACP for so many years, former school board member Noel Hammett, Miss Krishanda Harris, Miss Jeanette Harrison, Mr. Merritt McDonald, former East Baton Rouge Parish Metro Council member Byron Sharper, and Mr. Russell Stokes.
So
those brave people.
Not just all Black people.
No. We have,
Because it just seemed like common sense.
It was an unfair thing that they did right in the middle of qualifying for the next election. So we even brought up the issue that people could qualify by petition. We had the right to qualify by petition, but because the candidates didn't even know where the lines were, they could not qualify by petition.
Wait, hold up.
See, this is my school board member who has history and knows history, but these are the things that Dr. Johnson and I had to contend with in trying to put this lawsuit together.
What's making me say, hold up, is what did I say earlier? For the accelerated timeline, part of the narrative is the incumbents and the people that want to run against somebody. Let's not say it's about incumbent versus the people who by right have a right to run for office. If they are not an incumbent, they need an opportunity to know.
They need an opportunity to know. And they need an opportunity. Anybody who is running needs to know where the district lines are. Because
but the same people who voted the way they voted, that didn't matter with what you saying.
It did not, the more importantly, Dawn, it didn't matter to the courts. When we went to the court and we pointed these things out, Dr. Johnson, as I told you, was my professor, and he taught me trial ad. And one of the things that he taught me was, before you go down to the court, send yourself, right? So the pleadings were there far in advance of Dr. Johnson and I getting there. So it was no question that the pleadings had all of these things in it. You can look at the record even today. But when we made our argument, we still, to be honest with you, we still don't know why the court ruled against us. We just know that they ruled against us. And when we got to, when they did it, we said, oh no, this can't be right. We've given you too much that you're going to go ahead and say, these people can go ahead and run. Because what it actually did, even with the incumbents, it pitted certain incumbents that were not in favor, if you will. It pitted those incumbents against each other. And then we had one of the incumbents who had left the state, who had moved to Oklahoma, and was trying to keep his feet planted in East Baton Rouge. And they knew he was gone, so they weren't concerned about preserving his seat, but they were concerned about him being able to vote. And he did vote on the plan, and he was the reason that, in fact, a big part of the reason that the plan passed at the school board. It was very disheartening that the court paid no attention to all of the facts that we presented, and not just the facts, because we can't just say this is ugly and it shouldn't happen. We have to apply what has happened, the facts, to the law. And I can assure you that the facts were tight, the law was tight, and they ruled against us. And when we it was so fast, like it was up to the point of qualifying. And so when the judge ruled, we almost immediately filed for writs at the appellate court, and they summarily dismissed us. Just said writs denied. That was it. We didn't even get to go there and argue it. They said writs denied. And by the time we could have gone to the Supreme Court, qualifying was over. They were moving ahead. So it was a very disappointing experience with the courts and with the school board at that time. And that is why I say to people, it is important that we get involved and stay involved in the redistricting process. Because let me tell you, and I say this all the time on our radio show, Perspective. I forgot to tell you guys that that's one of the things that I do, is I host a radio show called Perspective every Tuesday and Thursday on WTQT 106.1 FM here in Baton Rouge. But one of the things that I say to people all the time is that nobody is trying to take anything away from you that doesn't have value. If they're trying to take away your right to vote, it's because your vote has value. You have to stay involved in the process. You have to know what people are doing. You have to know what the impact is going to be. You have to show up at these meetings, and you have to show up on election day.
Yes.
So, Dawn, let me just say one other thing, and I promise I'm going to stop. So it's not, we're looking at redistricting is going to deal with every level of government, right? It's going to deal with the city council, the school boards, the legislature, judgeships, to the extent that they will allow us to look at judgeships, because we know that the Supreme Court needs to be reapportioned. It is totally out of control. But it's not. It's national, and there is a concerted effort nationally to disenfranchise. So what you're seeing is bills that disenfranchise, particularly communities of color, are being shopped and enacted around the nation, in particularly in areas that are controlled by the Republican Party. They are trying to disenfranchise, and look, now it's not just about preventing us from voting. one of the huge efforts that's happening around the nation is after we voted, if their preferred candidate does not win, they want to have the option of nullifying votes that they don't like. And so it used to be just about keeping us from voting. It's not just that anymore. Just know that that is something that is happening, and it's happening nationwide.
What does that look like? What does that look like?
It looks like if they don't like the result, then they say that none of the votes that are there count at the national level, right? So if we're doing a federal
Like
election,
and the presidential, you mean?
that's right. Exactly what Donald
Okay.
Trump was trying to get these states around the nation, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and others. He was trying to get them to nullify the votes that he didn't like and to name other electors at the national level. So those people who were in the electoral college and who had the right to vote on behalf of the states, he wanted to nullify them, name other electors who would vote for him, although the people had voted. So don't think it's just about not giving people water in the lines. It is also about nullifying the votes after they have been cast.
Okay.
Keep an eye on this, because we have to read the
I let you
language.
go over.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm quitting.
That's all right, because it was important. I mean, but what you were saying was vitally important, and I know people would be interested in what you're saying. And then shout out to former board member Jerry Arbor, who is viewing the live stream. He's one of those that were pitted against.
Yes, he is, and he was essential to us in understanding what was happening at that time in around the drawing of the lines. He was fantastic help for myself and Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Jerry.
And Professor Johnson, I mean, sound like Attorney Tillman. Bester didn't cover it all, but if you
Well,
have,
that's why I wanted her to go first.
See,
so
that's
we
what
get
he
it
does
all-
to me all
get
the
it all out,
time.
right? And look, I want to say hello to everyone, also including my friend Jerry Arbor. But I will say, just at the end of Alfreda's presentation, the right to vote to me, is a fundamental and sacred right. It's the only. I always used to say the only difference between me and Mitt Romney on election day was he had one vote, no matter how many billions he had, and I had one vote. And when I go cast my vote, I felt just like everyone else. And that's the big deal. Look, in Louisiana, we had about 45% of the votes in 1898 when the grandfather clause was passed. And not, PBS Finchback got elected governor, a lieutenant governor, and then ultimately became governor in 1872. So after the Civil War and Reconstruction, the federal troops were put in the South to protect the right of Black voters. And that started being turned around. In Louisiana, the grandfather clause came out. And I often wonder, where were the people who either were Black or supported Black causes? How did they let that come out of the Louisiana legislature? It basically went throughout the South, taking away Black voters. If your forefather wasn't registered to vote before 1865, you had to go through all kind of stuff, taking tests and poll tax and all kind of things. And the Black codes came out, separate and unequal. And like Alfreda said, Brown versus Board of Education started turning things around. We had the March on Washington in '63. We had the Civil Rights Act in '64, the Voting Rights Act in '65. And we're only one generation away from the Voting Rights Act. So we really haven't, our people as a whole haven't been in the habit of voting. And when you're not in the habit of doing something, it's something you might do, you might not do. And we're continuing to work on it. Then we get setbacks where we can't get good justice departments to be involved administratively. I never forget when we filed a judicial lawsuit, there were 350 judgeships in Louisiana that the powers to be felt like they didn't have to get them pre-cleared or run them through an administrative process. And we had 350 judges, basically white, whose seats were in question because they hadn't been what Alfreda referred to as pre-clearance or approved by the Justice Department. And that was one of the things that helped us to resolve the judicial lawsuit, was because of the white judges didn't want to lose their seats. And so, you know, what can we do? So now, one of the things about that lawsuit we did, and it was on the numbers earlier that the vice president put up, was at the time we were fighting about going from 11 to 9, we actually should have had a majority of the 9 because whites were not in majority after the 2010 census. But see, that's how the other side keep us fighting it on one issue, and then we missed another issue, and they get their way. But they not gonna get their way this time because at least 6 of those seats ought to be controlled by minority voters, because Central decided they want to create their own district. Baker and Zachary was already outside of the parish or the school district. And now St. George want to do that. Get on out. You know, get out. But we're gonna keep focused on those numbers.
We're not gonna let them leave.
Yes,
Take
I'll
their
tell you
revenue.
that
45%.
You leave.
That's what I do. That 45%. Because see, they want to tell us everything else is now we used to have white and black. You got an ounce of black blood, you black. But now we got others or whatever they want to say. But look at the white percentage, not the others. Well, you got 45% in this district. 45% of 9 is 3 point something, but the courts don't allow you to round up. You have to round it out.
Less than 41%. Less than 41%.
No, I see them.
White votes, you saying? Yeah, less than, I mean.
They're going down. They're going down. They may not have but 2. And if they go ahead with St. George, we'll have a black school district. Now, what's important about that? After Brown, and we went through these 40-some years with East Baton Rouge Parish, as some of you know, white folk formed private schools, not just no charter schools, but private schools. They didn't want to be involved. And then because they ain't got enough money to support those schools, now they want to come in and take over the public schools. And now this year, we can't let that happen because our people are going to be saying, what happened to the community leaders, the school board members, the ministers, the fight for civil rights came out of the church? What happened to them, other elected officials? And we can continue to talk, but keep in mind, East Baton Rouge Parish is the same way. It should be at least 7 African-American minority districts and 5 white. And we want them to know in these type of public meetings that we are not just looking at the school board or the school system, we're also looking at the parish government. And that's my tag on the end of the brilliant presentation by Alfreda. And look, Alfreda, so that Don don't be jealous, Don is one of my former students also. So
thank you for the
I
love.
go ahead and say that because I know you kept saying that.
Dawn
said, well, what about me?
Dawn, look, the thing about him, you better run, girl. Because once he gets you, he got you.
All right, Pastor Smith, from a community perspective, historically, what you got?
Peter had a question for you, Miss Dawn.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. What you got? Peter?
One thing that Professor Johnson said that I think is that I think is such an important part of this discussion, particularly for the school board, both in East Baton Rouge, but around the state, is that well, obviously this is so, inextricably tied to race. There is also the economic piece to this, right? Which is that there is a concerted effort to privatize public education. And that, when we say like, oh, well, other than the racist piece of trying to suppress Black and brown communities, well, why else are they doing this, right? Like, why would they kind of go to such ends, open themselves up to lawsuits, all of these other things? It's because there's money there, right? Or at least that's how, they think about it. And so when we talk about, why we need to re-examine or, redraw the school district, race is that top issue, but there's also an economic piece to it. And I just think that it's important that we all, that everybody kind of understands how much money is being played in this. And when you look at what happens when we privatize schools, you know, there's been now a 25, 30-year kind of concerted effort to do this. And, you know, it's sort of promised that, oh, you know, competition, innovation, all this stuff is what's going to, you know, fix our failing schools. And that has not happened. I mean, it's been a 25, 30-year experiment that has absolutely failed. The real problem is that starting back in the 70s, we started defunding education. You know, everybody flips out about defund the police. Well, what about, you know, like nobody, you know, but those same people are okay with defund public education. In the 1970s, we started defunding public education. Not surprisingly, our schools, you know, started to fail. And then, you know, instead of saying, oh, well, maybe we made a mistake in defunding public education and we should refund public education. No, they said, we're going to hand this over to private business interests. And not surprisingly, because we see this everywhere that you privatize, private business interests extracted and exploited and, you know, took, you know, their as much of a cut as they could and left students and families behind. And if we, you know, so we really have to understand that that you know, there's a piece of this where the move, the sort of ultimate move by controlling the school board is to turn this into a fully privatized school system. And that will fail every family. But again, when you look at the population in the public school system, it is overwhelmingly Black and brown. So that means that, again, disproportionately, who's going to be harmed? It's going to be Black and brown communities. And so the professor kind of brought that up. And I just think that's one of those things that as I've sort of dived into this with different community leaders, it has become so clear to me is that is really kind of the ultimate goal is to do that and just extract and exploit the system.
Yeah.
If I may get a minute for response.
Yes, sir.
And I do agree. Of course, not only I'm teaching voting rights now, but I've taught civil rights for years. And I come to understand that people talk about slavery as if it was some type of social system, but it was an economic system because people were made to work for free. Whereas if they had to have other people do that work, they had to pay them. And so sometimes, you know, we talk about republic, democracy, and these type of things as it relates to voting, but we still live in a capitalistic society. And in order for the people who have to make money, you got materials and labor. So if you can get free labor, you get all these mansions and stuff that's built in Louisiana and down the river and all that was free labor, slave labor.
The state capital.
Yeah, the state capital. So you're right. I mean, when you really get down to it, for those of us who really look at it from an economic standpoint, this whole thing is nothing but about misusing. Look, God give us talents, the ability to do something for work. And then so what happens in a capitalistic society is a certain group of people exploit that. You know, they keep the masses fighting with each other. Why? Yes. We're generating energy. Look at what's happening now as a result of COVID. And folk who used to work for nothing, we call them the working poor. They're saying, well, I can get enough money off of stimulus or whatever. I don't have to go back. And what's going on now? Alfreda was talking about unemployment benefits. Remember how unemployment benefits should have gone to September or August, was cut down in July. And that was because, hey, we got to get them back out here working for nothing, even though they subject on the health scale to get killed. So I'm glad you brought that up, brother. We can join in that part of the conversation too, because our fight is the haves versus the have-nots. And if we can get enough have-nots to understand that they have not, then this fight is going to really take over, and we're going to stop all that. That's what's going on with these positions. Do you think these people want to be on these school boards and argue with Don Collins and all the people like her? People don't want to go there and be doing that, but they got to do it. Thank y'all very much for letting me.
And transitioning to Pastor Fred Jeff Smith, I like to summarize or surmise the framework as this. Yes, it is. It's definitely economic. It involves classism and racism. Fuse it. It helps keep everybody divided And that stratification puts people of color at the bottom. And Pastor Smith, I know you're very familiar with both sides. You're familiar with redistricting from a community perspective, and you also are also familiar with the privatization of education. So chime in as you see fit from the local leadership perspective.
I agree with everything that has been said by all parties. My number one concern with regard to this whole school issue is a recognition that this is a power play on the part of conservative white folk to try to regain a school system for free. They left the school system. The public school system was the greatest thing in the world until 1954. Then all of a sudden, the public school system became problematic, and we had to do something else. And private and parochial schools popped up all over the place. And what has happened in recent generations is that middle income and poor white folk have found it more and more economically disadvantageous to continue to try to keep their children in separate schools, private and parochial schools. And they have decided, oh, well, if we can regain control of the public school system, then we can keep our children in a public school system and yet keep them away from Black and brown children. And so they've tried various methods. They've tried voucher systems, and the Magnet program was an effort to do the same thing. And now they're being less inconspicuous about what they're trying to do, and they are attempting to co-opt the school system back by developing independent school districts. They did it with Baker, they did it with Zachary, they did it with Central. And I agree with Professor Johnson. If St. George wants to go. My only response is pay for it. My problem with what happened in the past is that we gave away schools. We gave away schools in Baker. We gave away schools in Zachary. We gave away schools in Central. And
you know what?
now they think they can take for free these schools that are in the southeastern part of the parish and form an independent St. George. They don't want to pay the legacy costs. They don't want to pay for the facilities. They don't want to pay for anything. In my experience, when you have a divorce, somebody's got to pay to leave. So pay what has to be paid. And part of that process with regard to the redistricting piece is making sure that appropriate parties are at the table to manage this separation. I believe that after all of the court fights that are taking place right now about St. George, it might be 3 years, 5 years. St. George is going to come into existence, and then another 5 years after that, an independent school system is going to evolve out of that. But pay for it. If you're going to take all of these things, then be sure that you leave the appropriate monies within the parish and within the school system, that the school system can continue to thrive and operate as it should.
So Dawn, I want to respond to something, if I may, that Reverend Smith said. See, he got it. He's exactly dead on. Mm-hmm. But what has happened is, and everybody was wondering, except for Dr. Johnson and me, why everybody was fighting so hard to be on the school board or to put certain people on the school board. It was because they wanted to convert those dollars that were that were.
Oh, you on mute. I'm unmute.
I don't even know how that happened. but they wanted to take those dollars and convert them, allow the what they're calling public charters to get that money and to have a board, a majority on that board that would acquiesce and not fight back and say, if you want to go, but you're going to have to pay to go. Nobody made that argument, and nobody from the school board went and fought that, because you can't just take people's property, although you make an argument that you may have contributed to it. If you want to go, you have the opportunity to go. But it's the same, like Dr. Johnson was saying, people, they wanted to have their own separate and unequal school systems, but what they found was, Louisiana's the median income here is $45,000 a year. Well, you can't pay for a private education for your child, in grade school, and then be prepared to pay for college on $45,000 to $50,000 a year. So that was my point. I'm sorry. I interrupted a little bit of Peter's time. I'm sorry, Peter. You know me.
Because we were going to go into how the history informs redistricting today, but we've covered that in going through the history. So we're at the point now where if you could share your organizational and or personal advocacy around redistricting in particular. How are you involved in current redistricting efforts? And we'll let Peter go first.
Well, thank you. I also wanted to start by saying thank you to Dawn and to everybody for letting me be on here. And really, one of the things I love about like being on these panels is, sometimes if you just see the link, you got other things going on, you don't do it necessarily. But like when you are one of the panelists, you get to listen to everybody. And so, I mean, for me, this is great because I also get to learn more, and I personally like to learn more. So just want to thank everybody for all of that, to start with. So Louisiana Progress, we like to think of ourselves as sort of a small but mighty force in this redistricting effort across the state, especially in the Southeast, just because that's where we have a little bit more capacity. We are looking to partner with local organizations pretty much anywhere who can use some help in terms of analysis, research, talking points, communication strategies, advocacy and organizing strategies. We have our redistricting guide up on our website. I'll drop that link in here in the chat in just a second. We have 3 parts so far, which is like part 1's a redistricting 101, part 2 is a redistricting glossary, part 3 we really dive into Louisiana redistricting, looking at the state legislature, some of the other statewide bodies, and some local some parishes. Particularly we look at East Baton Rouge and Jefferson Parish, which again I think are really the 2 biggest examples around the state of that intentional suppression of Black and Brown community voice and power through the redistricting process, where it's just very clear, very blatant, how this is happening and how it's playing out. And so we are looking, we've already been working with, I see Kathleen Randall, who's with Together Baton Rouge. We've been working with Together Baton Rouge on some stuff, especially on the school board so far. But really anybody who's out there who's interested in looking at their local redistricting situation, would like some help and some expertise and some analysis. That's really what we're trying to do. That's the role we're trying to fill. You can always, you can find us on our website, louisianaprogress.org, Louisiana spelled out. You can reach me directly, peter@louisianaprogress.org. You can find those materials on our website. And we're just really looking, we've got to get this, this is a great, not only is this an important issue for all the things that everybody's talked about, but when we talk about building power, people-centered power in this state, building a movement that can, really upend the, what I would describe as sort of a plantation economy. The way that this state is run is still very much in that vein. And if we're going to build a movement that's going to overturn that, redistricting is just such a key lever in doing that, and so when we talk about whether you're into criminal justice reform, environmental justice, education, healthcare, any of that, any issue you care about is a redistricting issue, Because when we come back in 6 months or a year or whatever it might be with something relating to that issue, the way that that local council or the state legislature, whoever it may be, reacts to that, votes on it, deals with that issue is going to be, it goes directly back to the redistricting process. And so that's just something I was trying to press upon people. Every issue is a redistricting issue. And this is our chance to get this done. And if you want some help, and you know, in any way really, and you share our principles, which are again trying to create greater racial proportionality and more competitive districts. If you share those values, that is, we want to help you get that done in your parish, in your neighborhood, in the state.
Thank you very much. And Professor Ernest Johnson, just share with us the work that you're doing as it relates to redistricting.
Judge Janice Clark and I teaching a class at Southern University Law Center this semester. The name of the class is Voting Rights Litigation. And we've actually had the students, we have about 20 students, and we've actually gone through voting right, redistricting cases and, you know, reapportionment. Let's talk about the difference between reapportionment and redistricting. Reapportionment takes place automatically, one man, one vote, constitution, after the census, to make sure that there's a, not the same number, but what is termed an ideal population within voting districts. And the ideal population is to take the number of the total population either within the state or in this instance within the East Baton Rouge Parish public school system, and divide it by the number of seats, which in this case is 9. And the vice president put the numbers of the ideal population up early on in her conversation. And then to make sure that those districts are equal, not equal, but within what we call a deviation, 5%. 5% more than that ideal population, 5% below, anything in between is considered an ideal district. And so under the one man, one vote rule, we say that all of the individuals or people living within that school district, they have a right to, in single member districts, which is the preferred remedy in these type of cases, where you have individual districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that they are within the ideal population size. If you take the deviation of 5% and then add or subtract, and that's how we look at it. If there are districts who are outside of the deviation, are greater than or less than the deviation, we call those districts malapportioned. They're not set up for the one man, one vote rule. Now that's under the Constitution. 1965 Voting Rights Act say that districts could not dilute a minority voting strength. In other words, if minorities are constantly voting and they can't get their candidates elected, then that is dilution of minority voting strength under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Judge Clark and I have about 20 students. We have allowed them to select areas that they would like to look at redistricting. And so we are looking at the Louisiana Supreme Court getting 2 out of 7. The PSC, which has 5, already have 1. But we're going to make a constitutional, we're going to make a suggestion, a recommendation for a constitutional amendment to move the PSC from 5 to 7, with 2 of those seats being African American, like the Supreme Court. The Bessie Board, believe it or not, that's got 8 elected districts, 3 appointed by the governor, which makes up the total of 9. We're looking at seeing if we can get 1 more elected district at the Bessie Board level, which will bring it to 9 from 8. And then we'll have 3 minority elected districts rather than 2 to give more power to that area. Of course, East Baton Rouge Parish, the schools, the public school system, the Metro Council, which is malapportioned. You know, you have more than a majority African Americans and you have a majority of white districts. It's got to be changed. You know, whether they looking at it now or somebody sleeping on the job, but it's got to come around. We got to get that done. And there's some other areas, you know, Caddo Parish, which we're not doing Caddo Parish, but Caddo Parish has a majority African Americans according to the census, and there should be a flip in the police jury in Caddo Parish and the school system. That's just before you even get into drawing districts. We do have some partners that we work with, and that is the final presentation for these students, which is really coming up at the end of this month. So we kind of got our feet dug in, and we're hoping to have at least 20 voting rights attorneys ready for the next round of census. And now the reapportion redistricting, I think this is historic for the state of Louisiana to see these type of turnarounds. It probably would have been more. A lot of people migrated from the New Orleans or Orleans Parish away from, because of the storms and stuff like that. Whereas now East Baton Rouge Parish is the largest parish in the state. Jefferson Parish, population-wise, the second largest, and Orleans is third. But it's very significant because, like I said earlier, the grandfather clause came out of Louisiana, Baton Rouge, not the new state capital, but the old one that they say is a museum. A lot of low-down stuff has come out of Louisiana. And this is the capital city. And now, Black folk, because they never thought, see, when we filed a lawsuit that created the extra seat on the Metro Council, it used to be Miss Tarzan's seat when we changed it over in federal court. But what it do was, who people like, came down to the chambers of the council about 2 or 3 weeks before he died and say, don't let them win. What? Don't let them win. We set this plan of government up in 1947 because we knew one day they'd take over. But we set it up where they wouldn't control the city because we had the parish controlling the city. They tell us it's a consolidated government. It's not a consolidated government. It's a misnomer. The consolidated government would be Orleans Parish in New Orleans. You don't have no other extra cities in it. And that's what they wanted. And in the plan of government, when we filed a lawsuit, there was a prohibition against any other city being formed in East Baton Rouge Parish other than Baker and Zachary. And the people out in Central filed a lawsuit and entered into a compromise with the mayor president of the city, where he allowed them to do that. We shouldn't allow that to happen. Black people can vote and understand voting just like anybody else, and we should be able to do that. Now, one of the other points I wanted to make, I was talking with the New Orleans, one of the New Orleans school board members at one time, speaking on what somebody said earlier about controlling those facilities. See, the charter school process wouldn't work unless they get them buildings. Y'all know that those buildings were paid for with the tax dollars, the 1/16 tax dollars that everybody in the parish had to pay for the schools, the public schools to operate. They got to have those buildings. And so New Orleans is just about total charter school. They might let the public have one.
Now it is 100%. Even their magnet programs are charter.
All right, now. So I asked one of the school board members, I said, how did they get those buildings? He said, what? I said, the buildings belong to the public schools. That's tax dollars being paid for with that. How did the charter people get that? And they didn't know. The school board member didn't know. And you know what? I think, now I stand to be corrected, but I think the school board, the charter school people pay like $1 a year or something like that to get their buildings.
Yeah, depend on the contract. But see, that's the thing a lot of people don't understand is that in most instances, that tax dollar is paying for that building, but that ownership is not public. It's either owned by the board of the charter or owned by the private corporation that they are paying that lease to.
But not right, that lease, but they don't own it. They don't own them buildings because they're public dollars. And so like was said earlier, like Rev said, if they when they get ready to take them buildings over, kind of let Central get away with it. But when they get ready to take them buildings over, charge them some money.
That's right.
We shouldn't be worried about, well,
correct.
if we lose those schools, the public school system will be in trouble. No, it's not.
Mhm.
No, Georgetown will be in trouble because when they say they want those buildings from a legal standpoint is owned by the EBR school system. They don't get those buildings when they decide they want to form their own government, and charge them and go to court with it. Let them people know we're not gonna let y'all have that. Y'all gonna undercut us, cut our throats, and we're gonna give you the knife to cut our throats.
But that's why they elect the people that they do, because they know that those people are going to be complicit in them taking that property. They don't fight back. That's what that's about. That's
But
why
I
they
think-
invest all of that money.
I
They have
think
also
Lloyd-
laid the
protection.
they've
Yeah,
also
yeah.
laid the foundation by using the last 30 years to take control of the court system. They control the judges. Now, they don't control the judges in East Baton Rouge Parish, but they control the judges mostly around the state. And when these things come up for trial, the courts were the umpires that said Brown versus Board of Education was going to be ruled in favor of Brown. The court system was the one that said that separate but equal was wrong. And these white folk determined that ain't gonna happen again.
Mhm.
We're gonna use the next generation and a half to control the court system so that when we do what we do and they appeal to the court system is not going to rule in their favor. Their hope is that once it reaches the place where a judge has to decide, that the judge is going to come down in their favor. And that's why it's so important that we pay attention to who becomes a judge, to who appoints judges in our federal courts, lower courts, and on the state, on the United States Supreme Court. This was not by accident. They've been playing chess for the last 30 years,
Yeah.
while other folk been playing tiddlywinks. They ain't even playing checkers. They're playing tiddlywinks.
Yeah.
And we have allowed this to fester to a place where they feel like they don't have to hide what they are doing anymore, because we have control of the system on so many different levels that we're going to win regardless.
Mhm.
That's their expectation.
Mhm. And look, to your point, you mentioned that the court used to rule one way, like Brown versus Board of Education, and then they say, well, we got to nip this in the butt. Just another shout out on my Culture and Diversity Read a Book list. In July, in August, the focus was the socioeconomic hierarchies and the laws and policies that create them. If you are more interested in what Pastor Smith had just mentioned, check out Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America by Adam Cohen. And Pastor Smith, you keep talking, because please share what you as an individual or as the church or what have you is doing to regarding redistricting.
I'm a part of a small confederation of pastors known as Prophetic Voices that has undertaken the responsibility of advocacy for social justice issues that most acutely affect Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish, but more broadly affects the state of Louisiana as a whole. When it comes to redistricting, I don't think that it can be stated how important this is on every level, not just the school board, on every level. And I'm wading into territory where I'm not an expert, and I have experts on the panel, so I'm very cautious about what I'm about to say. But common sense says to me that if you have 1/3 of the vote in this state, if 1/3 of the people in this state are African American, and you have 6 United States House of Representatives Congress people, that 2 of those 6 ought to be in majority minority districts. I ain't no law professor, but I do know how to do basic math, and 1/3 of 6 is 2, not 1. So there ought to be some redistricting that allows for a second majority minority district on the congressional level. With regard to the state legislature, I think one of the things that has to be impressed upon some of our African-American legislators is that you don't need 85% in your district in order to hold your seat. If you need 85%,
One more time.
if you
One more time.
need 85% to hold your seat, then maybe you don't belong in the seat. We have been our own worst enemy by allowing for this packing and stacking in districts that we think will give us overwhelming majorities. And then in the majority white districts where you're only 10 to 15% of the vote, they don't have to pay attention to you because you have no power beyond going down and to a meeting and raising your hand and making your complaint. They know that you have no recourse. These districts need to be more balanced in such a way so that even if it's a white representative in the seat, state legislator, state senator, they have to pay attention to what you are saying. They can't just dismiss you because they know that your numbers are so small that you cannot make an impact. And so from our standpoint, from Prophetic Voices standpoint, this involves us partnering with others to help us educate the public about these matters, make us aware of how important these matters are, and put us in positions where we can make our voices heard and get on the record. We need to go to Metro Council meetings. We need to go to school board meetings. We need to show up at the fire and police union board meeting. The police union is one of the most corrupt things that exists within East Baton Rouge Parish, but they are allowed to exist because they have these marathon meetings and nobody goes down there and challenges what is being done. And the way in which these people get on these seats. The guy who runs the board, the municipal board, was once cited by that board for corruption and violence against a minority. He was fired and rehired, and yet they put him in this position where he leads this municipal board. It's a corrupt system. That's why I smile when Professor Johnson said a lot of corrupt stuff has come out of the state capitol. A lot of corrupt stuff has come out of Baton Rouge, period. And if you are not informed as to what is going on, and if you're not motivated to respond to those things that are going on, then you run the risk of having it happen again. The only way to stop these things from happening is to decide that you're going to make your voices heard, and you're going to have to be assertive in doing so. Being nice and kind and all this, there's a place for that, but at some point you're going to have to be disruptive. And so we're trying to raise the level of awareness to where people can be intelligently disruptive.
Thank you. All right. Attorney Alfreda Tillman Bester.
Okay. I was trying to be good. Y'all made me want to talk so much, and I want to just put my hand over my mouth so I wouldn't respond to everything. But let me just say, my program, Vulnerable Communities and People's Initiative at Southern University Law Center, is an anti-poverty program. And the one thing that we have determined is that every aspect of a person's life that makes them vulnerable, whether it's healthcare, education, or housing, or whatever the issue, education, all of it, they're inextricably tied. You cannot talk to me about being hungry and not talk to me about being housed. You can't talk to me about being sick and not talk to me about being educated, because if I go to my doctor, I need to be able to understand the discharge plan that he's given to me or she's given to me, and also to be able to understand how to take the medicine that I have. So we have what are called political determinants of health, which is the essential right. Everybody, it is a human right to be able to go to a doctor and to be able to have that affordable quality care, right? social determinants of health, they're also, we talk about social determinants all the time. What we don't talk about quite as much are the political determinants of health. And where do those start? Those start with redistricting, because it starts with our ability to elect people who are sensitive to the community. And every elected official is elected to protect the health and safety at every level, is elected to protect the health and safety of the people that are their constituents. Just think about that for a second. Whether it's your, on the school board or the city council, legislature, wherever, to protect the health and safety of the people. So redistricting is the foundation of it all, because if the lines are drawn unfairly, it means that you are being taxed without representation. Name one of those senators or state rep or U.S. congressman, aside from Troy Carter, who represents anybody of color, who represents them, not officially in their capacity, but who actually represents the interests of people of color, and not just people of color, of people who want to see inclusivity. Anybody who wants to see Louisiana function for everybody, those people do not represent us. They just don't. And so it starts with redistricting, and then redistricting first, being able to select the person who the constituents want, and then thirdly, to be involved after you've elected the people that you put in place. And so it's all about the social determinants, the political determinants, identifying those things and helping to develop public policy that actually impacts it. And the only way that you're going to be able to influence the public policy is that you assure that you have the opportunity to elect people who have the interest of the best interest of the people for the people's health and safety and their quality of life.
Thank you. Okay, so.
Oh, one other thing, Dawn, I'm sorry, let me just say this. There is a legislative roadshow that is going around the state right now to all of the larger metropolitan statistical areas, right? So on November the 16th, November the 16th, they will be at Southern University at the Cotillion Ballroom. You can come in person. It starts I believe it starts at 6 o'clock. Don't hold me to that. I'll get that information to Dawn. I think it starts at 6 o'clock. It's from 6 until 8. Is that right, Peter? Yeah. 6 to 8:30. And if you don't feel comfortable going in person, you can view it online at the legislative website. All you have to do is to go to the legislative homepage and then click on the meetings that are in session, and you can watch it live. You can also because you're not there, they won't let you make comment, but you can write. If you're not going, you can write and put on the record what you want to have said and what you want to be a part of the record about redistricting in Louisiana.
Okay, thank you. That is very important. I appreciate that. Okay, and so we have, I don't see any Q&As in the on the Zoom. In the Facebook live stream, there was no question but a comment from a magnet parent, Sister Mary Juno. She did have, she she wanted to mention that, and another comment by Brother Paul Gary, and I'll read his too. So her statement is that regarding magnet programs, many neighborhoods don't have schools. The magnet demographics reflect the overall parish demographics. So she wanted to raise that up. The takeaway that I got from what Pastor Fred Jeff Smith had said as it relates to what's going on with charters, private schools, etc., and then he mentioned magnet, and some, and I absolutely won't speak for him, but my takeaway is that some would not participate if it was not for magnet. Now, that being said, some people, when you look at the overall demographics of our magnet programs, it's majority children of color in those programs, including at Liberty, the former Robert E. Lee, my alma mater. I just claim it. It was Robert E. Lee. That was the historical thing at the time. That's what it was. But Pastor Smith, did you want to?
The purpose of a magnet school when it started was to draw white children back into the public school system. I was a part of the first magnet school program here in East Baton Rouge Parish, Baton Rouge High School. Baton Rouge High School was built by white folk for white folk, and it had become a black school. They did not want it to become a black school. They wanted to find a way to draw white folk back into the public school system, and so they developed the program. Now, they sold it as a program designed for academic excellence, for children who achieved above and beyond what the typical neighborhood school could provide. But when you looked at the nuts and bolts of it, it was a 2.5 GPA. 2.5 GPA is not excellent. You know, I'm not an excellent academic person. I had a 2.5 GPA, and it allowed me to attend a magnet program. The big thing that they sold on it was that you could not have regular sports, major sports. You could not have football, basketball, baseball, but you could have gymnastics, you could have tennis, you could have golf, you could have wrestling, you could have some of these other sports, because they saw that as something that was more palatable towards a different clientele of student. But don't tell me that the magnet program wasn't designed. I don't know what it is now. I'm not in your seat, but I know what it was designed to do. It was designed to draw white children back into the public school system. And the fact that over the 40 some odd years since I left Baton Rouge High, that it has become majority African American does not change the fact that in its original design, it was designed to bring white children back into the classroom. Everything that they have tried to do is designed to bring white children back into the classroom. Vouchers were designed to bring white children back into the classroom. Let them take the money and put it where they wanted to put the money. Charter schools, public charters, private charters. And by the way, charters don't work in East Baton Rouge Parish.
They don't work anywhere.
In other places. Their academic record is abysmal here in East Baton Rouge Parish.
They are abysmal everywhere.
Still have fools like Rolf McAllister out there punching up, pulling for charter schools and the like, simply as a ploy to say, let's bring Jane and John back into the school system, but in a school where they don't have to sit next to Mustafa and Shaniqua. That's what this is all designed for.
And look, to your point, on the magnet website, the National Magnet website, they talk about the history and the purpose. And they say, they use the term voluntary deseg. But I mean, to your point, that is where it started. As the demographics as white flight has taken place, beyond the school system and outside of the parish altogether, then yes, things, families of color are able to take more advantage, etc. But I mean, yeah, that definitely is why it was started. And okay, other point was Brother Paul Gary, Calcasieu Parish School Board and police jury lines are the same. Oh, gerrymandered. Okay, just a little comment. Okay, so no other questions. So we can move forward with closing thoughts. And I'll just mention, I wanted to make sure people understood, and some of you touched on it, but I want to reiterate and make sure people understand that they can be involved, whether it's attending school board meetings and keeping up with our redistricting process whenever we decide what the redistricting process is and participating in it, or plugging into some of these very active groups that my guest just mentioned. Reach out. I will take the contact information that was put in the chat. I'll put it on the Facebook Live comments because there's a lot more views over time that'll show up and people can go, and that's where the recording is, and they'll see Peter's contact info. I'll put, if you all don't mind, I'll put everybody's email address. That sound good? Okay, along with the name of your organization, so people can reach out to you in that way. Closing thoughts. Just want to say thank you all so much for being on my roundtable talk for this month. I probably will be reaching out to some of you, if not all of you, for another one as we move forward in the process to deal with the process itself as it moves forward. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We've said it before, we'll say it again. Redistricting is the most important vote that anyone makes in any elected body, period. Period. And so don't wait until election day when all you have is a choice of candidates based on a process that has come and gone. Get involved now and stay involved. All right, so with that, peace and blessings. Thank you all again. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn, for having us.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.